Hello and welcome to the first video in week 4 on current issues and future challenges in ADMS 1010 exploring the functions of business. In this video we will be looking at the concept of corporate social responsibility, its connection with sustainability and sustainable development, and the variety of ways in which these concerns have become intertwined with contemporary business practices. Quick look at the agenda. We'll start by quickly discussing the assigned material for this week, Friedman's arguments about corporate social responsibility on the one hand, and the IPCC videos on climate change on the other, and why you should care. Following that, we'll look at some current themes in the business community that pertain to social responsibility and sustainability, as well as the concept of corporate social responsibility itself, which originated in the mid-20th century. Next, we'll turn to Friedman's critique of CSR, corporate social responsibility, and look at some of the claims that he makes in his editorial. We'll also consider the extent to which Friedman's view qualifies as a doctrine about business. We'll finish by looking at the history of the concept of sustainability and sustainable development and in its relationship to business, and a quick look at sustainability today. As we shall see, despite Friedman's arguments to the contrary, both CSR and sustainability continue to figure large in the contemporary business world. Okay, so this week you were asked to read Friedman's criticism of CSR and watch 2 videos from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, on their 5th assessment report and another video on the mitigation of climate change. Perhaps it was not immediately clear how either of these materials pertain to the current issues, future challenges theme of the week, and in this video and the next we'll endeavor to make this a little bit clearer for you. So in a nutshell, both perspectives pertain to business's place in the world. What is the relationship of business with society in which it operates, and what responsibilities, if any, should business have to that world? To what extent do all the external problems occurring in the world really concern business? If so, how? Moreover, is it possible that thinking about business in the 20th century may have had a part to play in giving rise to such problems? If so, what can be done to change the way we think about business that might help to solve these problems moving forward? These are all questions that continue to be relevant to business today, and they've given rise to several current themes in business studies concerning business's place in the world. Generally speaking, these themes pertain to the importance of business being accountable in some way for its actions and impacts on society or the environment outside itself. These themes are all highly interconnected, and each probably deserves a video of its own, if not an entire course. In this video, we'll be providing a brief introduction to these themes and looking at how they evolved in connection with responsibility and sustainability in the latter half of the 20th century. Turning now to corporate social responsibility. Probably the most logical place to begin is with Howard Bowden's publication of The Social Responsibilities of the Businessman in 1953. Which provided one of the earliest discussions of business ethics and responsibility. The archaic aspects of this book are present in the title, What About Business Women? But it nevertheless remains a founding text in the study of corporate social responsibility. Concern about social responsibility only grew throughout the 1960s. In 1962, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, in which she linked widespread pesticide use to both animal and human harm. This book is often credited with sparking the environmental movement, and thus has played an important role in the evolution of the concept of sustainability as well. In 1965, Ralph Nader published Unsafe at Any Speed, taking American car manufacturers to task for resisting the addition of safety features such as the seatbelt, and for generally prioritizing costs over broader social concerns. The common theme of Carson and Nader's books is not only that they criticize business for contributing to social harm, but also the allegation that business knew about the problems but worked to cover them up or to evade responsibility. We continue to see today's examples of corporate irresponsibility, including but not limited to the auto industry. For example, GM's ignition switch scandal or the more recent Volkswagen emissions test scandal. Indeed, by the late 1960s, the term corporate social responsibility was becoming increasingly common in business parlance. This was largely a response to increasing pressure on business to reform and to behave more responsibly, pressure emanating both from society and from activist shareholders seeking to influence corporate goals. In 1971, prominent Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman published his rather famous rebuttal of CSR, encapsulating in very clear form an essentialist view of business roles and responsibilities, namely that business's only responsibility was to itself, to maximize profits. As Friedman put it, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. So let's look at some of Friedman's main claims in this editorial. He begins by noting that only people have responsibilities, and since corporations are artificial people, they can only have artificial responsibilities. That is, responsibilities that are defined by their basic nature, the basic nature of their artificial personhood. For example, corporations exist to conduct business. Recalling from last week's discussion, however, organizations are nevertheless social entities made up of people. In a sense, therefore, a corporation still has responsible agents working within it. Appearing to recognize this, Friedman argues that, in fact, corporate agents, like executives, are only directly responsible to the corporation's owners, which in the case of a corporation are its major shareholders. The nature, he goes on to suggest, is to act as much as possible in accordance with the owner's desires, which is to say, to make as much money as possible. As individuals, the shareholders are free to do with their money as they please, and if they feel like it, they can spend it all on social causes. But if the agents of the corporation take actions that effectively spend that money on such causes before it reaches the shareholders, this is in effect taking someone else's money. And if society deems it so important that corporate proceeds be spent on social causes, Friedman suggests, they can do it by imposing taxes, but not through individual executives acting out of accordance with the basic principles of the corporation they represent. Friedman concludes by noting, the doctrine of social responsibility would extend the scope of political mechanism to every human activity. It does not differ in philosophy from the most explicitly collectivist doctrine. What does he mean by this? He notes two different kinds of political principles associated with market mechanisms on one hand and the political mechanism on the other. The political principle of the market mechanism, he argues, is unanimity. In an ideal free market resting on private property, no individual can coerce any other. All cooperation is voluntary. All parties to such cooperation benefit, or they need not participate. Under this principle, the notion of society and social responsibilities makes little sense, as society is only a collection of individuals. Contrast that with what Friedman suggests as the political principle of the political mechanism, conformity. Instead of merely being called upon to act in accordance with one's contractual obligations, this mechanism forces people to conform with the social interest, whether they like it or not. Basically, Friedman is arguing, very much in Cold War rhetoric common to the time, that the doctrine of corporate social responsibility embodies a socialistic politics, and its extension to the private sector can be equated with the most socialist political form, communism. Note Friedman's use of the term doctrine to criticize corporate social responsibility. What is a doctrine? Well, Merriam-Webster defines a doctrine as a set of ideas or beliefs that are taught or believed to be true, a statement of government policy, especially in international relations. Similarly, Wikipedia describes a doctrine as a codification of beliefs or a body of teachings or instructions, taught principles or positions, as the body of teachings and a branch of knowledge or belief system. In some organizations, doctrine is simply defined as that which is taught. In other words, the basis for institutional teaching of its personnel, internal ways of doing business. Note that in both definitions, doctrine is associated with a body of knowledge that is, on the one hand, taught or instructional in nature, a training manual in a way, required for one to become indoctrinated into the way things are done in a given organization. And on the other hand, a set of beliefs that are thought to be true. In short, a doctrine is, as Friedman might have put it, indicative of the political mechanism to enforce conformity, but not based on the way things really are, or lacking strong evidence to demonstrate its truth. Based on those definitions, we might therefore turn things around and ask whether or not Friedman's perspective on the nature of business is itself, in fact, a doctrine. One way of getting to that would be to investigate the evidence that he uses to support his claims. Here are some examples. The great virtue of private competitive enterprise: it forces people to be responsible for their own actions and makes it difficult for them to exploit other people or for either selfish or unselfish purposes. And the use of the cloak of social responsibility and the nonsense spoken in its name by influential and prestigious businessmen does clearly harm the foundations of a free society. They are incredibly short-sighted and muddle-headed in matters that are outside their businesses but affect the possible survival of business in general. Do either of those statements contain evidence to support their being true, or do you think maybe they're just assertions about the way business should operate? I'll leave that for you to decide. Let's turn now to look at a brief history of the evolution of CSR and its connection with sustainability. As mentioned previously, concerns began to mount in the mid-20th century regarding environmental degradation and pollution. As a reflection of this growing concern, states worldwide began to establish departments tasked with managing and regulating business activity as it pertains to the environment. For example, the U.S. EPA, the first government department with a mandate to protect the natural environment, was established in 1970. Environment Canada was established not long after, in 1971. In the early 1970s, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, put in place an oil embargo against the United States and the Netherlands, causing massive economic disruption to both countries and to the global economy. The consequences were many, including the establishment of an international organization, the International Energy Agency, to represent the interests of oil importing countries. It also led to the first fuel efficiency standards in the U.S. as part of an attempt to reduce dependence on foreign oil. The concept of corporate social responsibility continued to develop during this time. One of the key formulations of the concept was in the 1984 book by Ed Freeman on strategic management, who argued that firms do better if they focus more broadly on benefiting stakeholders and not narrowly on stockholders. Whereas a stockholder is someone who only has a direct financial interest in the profitability of the firm, a stakeholder can be any group or individual who may be affected by the business's activities. In 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development released Our Common Future, which is often referred to as the Brundtland Report after the Commission's chairperson. The Brundtland Report put forward the most commonly used definition of sustainable development today, whereas sustainable development is that which meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. In 1996, the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO, established its ISO 14000 Environmental Management System as a means to measure and evaluate compliance with a set of norms and practices for environmental impacts associated with business activities. This indicates a growing interest in the business community at the time, not only in being recognized for their actions, but also in agreeing to a standard for what constitutes good environmental management. In 1997, John Elkington coined the relatively well-known term triple bottom line. Elkington's argument was that business should focus not only on their economic bottom line, but also on their social and environmental bottom lines as well. Of course, questions can be raised about whether or not actions can trade off between these bottom lines, but an expansive view of the triple bottom line would be to work toward outcomes that benefit each concern. This is perhaps the dominant conception for thinking about relationships between business and sustainability today. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, both corporate social responsibility and sustainability continued to gain ground as important concepts in contemporary business. They have been helped along the way by prominent examples of corporate malfeasance and consequent social harms. For example, the Enron accounting scandal in 2001, which brought renewed focus on ethics and corporate governance. Similarly, the crisis caused by the failure of the U.S. subprime mortgage sector and the ensuing bursting of the housing bubble led many to rethink whether or not banks should have more oversight and regulation to protect against future collapses. An even more recent phenomena brings to the fore the importance of considering how business activities and poor regulation and oversight may come back to haunt society, causing massive economic disruption and damage. Today, we can see that the notion of sustainability is firmly entrenched in business. This is true across many industries such as forestry, investment, construction, clothing, energy, agriculture, fishing, and transportation. It's also true across business functions such as supply chain management, manufacturing, standards, shipping, marketing, design, and accounting. We can also see evidence of the importance of corporate social responsibility and sustainability in modern corporate reporting, which certainly pays lip service to the two themes. From Walmart to Shell to ExxonMobil and others, we can see that these companies' attention to CSR and sustainability, at least in their reporting, has not hindered their ability to make money. We will conclude this video by asking you to consider three things. In 1970, Milton Friedman proclaimed that the only social responsibility of business is to maximize profit. 40 plus years later, corporate social responsibility and sustainability are mainstream business practices. How did this happen?